Today is April 3rd, 2018. This is Stephen Palmer with Tom Duane in his offices on 8th Avenue to conduct an interview about his life and its relationship to Stonewall and gay consciousness. So as I mentioned to you in the other room, I was going to just some rapid fire questions to get to the task at hand. If you could just tell me where you were born, what year.
I was born in French Hospital, which is on West 30th Street, which is now affordable housing. But my parents took me back to Queens, where I grew up. So I grew up in Flushing, Queens, in a neighborhood called Broadway Flushing. If you ever take the Long Island Railroad, it's the Broadway stop, because Flushing is actually a very large place within New York City, with I think 4 of its own stops on the Long Island Railroad. Anyway, too much information. But my mother actually wanted to live in Manhattan, so by rights, as an Irish Catholic kid, we should have grown up in Stuyvesant Town. But my father's mother lived in Flushing, and he needed to be close to her. He was the oldest son, 8 children, and his mother was a widow, so off we went to Flushing. And I was the reason my parents had to buy a house in Flushing, actually, because the apartment they were in, which I think was in Kew Gardens, was a 1-bedroom, and I was the 3rd kid, and there was no more room. So off we went to Flushing.
You had 2 siblings?
3, actually. 2 older brothers and a younger brother who passed away in 1995, who was also gay and who had a brain tumor in early adolescence, and which took a very long time to diagnose, and it was practically the dark ages of brain cancer in those days. And finally, it was a doctor that was able to stop it from growing with radiation that could sort of pinpoint where it was. And then in 1995, he had another brain tumor and passed away pretty quickly from that in June of 1995.
What were your brothers' names?
Jimmy, James after my father, who was Jim, because my brother Jimmy has a son named James. They all have their own form of James. John Patrick Flanagan, or John Flanagan Patrick Duane. I'm Thomas Keene David Duane. The 3rd name is a confirmation name. And then my younger brother was William Hallinan Duane. And I can't remember, he may have been Damien, might have been the name he took as confirmation name. But we were Jimmy, John, Tom, and Bill, although I was Tommy some of the time to my brothers, and my nieces and nephews called me that, and Bill was also Billy. John was had a nickname at one time, Jake, but he was mostly John, and Jimmy was always Jimmy. But I have been Thomas, Tom, and Tommy. I've had them all. I've been called them all.
So the full one with the confirmation is?
Thomas Keene, Keane, David Duane. They're all family names, Keene and Hallinan and Flanagan. We're 100% Irish.
100% Irish and 100% Catholic?
Well, 100% Catholic, yes, but there is a little bit of a Protestant strain, but we don't really discuss that much. Although and among my nieces and nephews, they're sort of evenly split between Episcopalian and Roman Catholic. And my younger brother, actually Billy, was very much an Episcopalian and very much not a Roman Catholic anymore, because my mother brought in a priest to give him the last rites, and you could tell he was sort of distressed by that. So then I brought in his favorite Episcopalian priest, and she gave him the last rites, and that was very much relaxing for him. So people in comas, they actually do know what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Of course, they tell you about it when they come out of it, and they get the information correct. Did you go to Catholic school?
I did. Mm-hmm. I went to Catholic elementary school. I actually, I was born in 1955. My older brother John we were almost Irish twins. He was born in, must have been 1953, August of 1953. Anyway, he was a year ahead of me. He was to be a year ahead of me in school. So off I went to kindergarten first, and I demanded to go to first grade, and because my brother John, who I idolized, had been in first grade, was now in second grade, and so I wanted to like be right there with him. He was a very important figure in my life, and so I demanded to go to first grade. So I was sent to a parochial school close to my parochial school, our parish parochial school. We lived in St. Andrews. I went to St. Michael's for first grade, and it was a nightmare. The nuns at St. Michael's, I was in terror the entire time I was there. And finally, a spot opened up at St. Andrews, and I went there. And while the nuns were still strict, they were not like scary, terrifying or anything. So I went 8 years to St. Andrew, Avellino Elementary School. There were like 53 children in our class. Then I went to Holy Cross High School, although I didn't want to go to Holy Cross High School. I wanted to go to Fordham Prep in the Bronx, but my parents did not want me to travel so much. It would have been, 2 subways and a bus or something. So Holy Cross was within walking distance of where we lived. And I wanted to spend as much time not at home as possible. However, they had different plans. So I went to Holy Cross High School, and then, which was an all-gay high school. I mean, an all-boys high school. That's not an original joke, but it's old enough that it's new again.
Can I back up for just a second?
Sure.
Why was your older brother an important figure in your life?
He was sort of my protector, and very much looked out for me. And my oldest brother was just 2 years older than John, but that was like a whole different world. And so I just, John was popular. He's still with us. He's a great guy. In fact, he's running for office this year. He was an assembly member between 82 and 84. Came in with Cuomo the first, went out with Reagan. And he's run a couple times since then and hasn't won. But he's running for the state senate now again. Anyway, I digress. But actually, he in a way inspired me in politics, and because he was very much interested in political things. He was the president of his class at Colgate University, president of the school at Colgate University, where he went to undergraduate school. Anyway, he was my protector, let me hang out with him. He was good at sports, he was popular, he was funny, he was nice, he was good to me. And even when I, let's say the loss of a dog when I was a child, that I had a collie puppy, when she was no longer with us after just a few months, he was the one that really tried to comfort me most of all. So, in many ways he was very important in my life, still is very important in my life, as is my oldest brother, with whom who lives in Boston, who I have tremendous admiration for also. He's a great guy and also sort of political, not run for office political, but he and his wife, it's a place they lived in Boston, and basically the way they told people to vote, that's how they voted. So, and which is odd because my parents felt it was very important to vote, but we're not in any way political. But my mother's father was an FDR Democrat and really owed his family's livelihood to being a civil servant. He was a tugboat captain. Before that, he was a Staten Island ferry captain. So a little bit of before there was a Verrazano Bridge, there was everyone had to use the ferry and cars would go on the ferry. So he did that, and then he switched to be a tugboat captain. And his wife, my grandmother, who was also a very important figure in my life who passed away from what I now know to be breast cancer. At the time, my parents, they called it throat cancer because I guess they weren't supposed to say breast, but I know now it was breast cancer. And she passed away when I was not quite 9 years old. But her brother, one of her brothers, was a district attorney in Queens and went on to be a judge in Queens. So
you've got a very strong background of civic-mindedness in your family.
Yes.
Which will unfold to what you've been doing for the last several years then, but that's really kind of powerful.
And it's just my father and mother weren't, as I say, political, but they really believed in, civic action and work in our Catholic parish. My mother was a member of various, women's groups in the parish, and my father was active in parish groups, but also went on to be on the board of a local bank and hospital. And growing up, he was a coach in the CYO, the Catholic Youth Organization Leagues. And so, yes, there was a lot of almost though effortless giving back. No one ever complained about people spending a lot of time doing good works, or what I guess you would call it. And my father, not a Democrat, a registered independent, more libertarian. He actually liked Goldwater. He liked Nixon. My mother's family, 1,000% Kennedy, and then on for Johnson. And we all became the boys. We all became more like FDR Democrats than anything else, because my grandfather was lost to the Democrats for a while when George McGovern was their candidate. I guess he became a non-McGovern Democrat, but he did not like Nixon, and he very much believed in Democrats as the path to follow, and we all followed the path. And my father, when he got older, interestingly got more progressive. I wouldn't say he was a flaming liberal, but he was progressive. And it's interesting because my parents were sort of like the Catholics in the true sense of the word. They believed in doing good works. They were against the death penalty, but they were also against abortion, although abortion was not the thing that drove them. But interestingly, both of them were very much opposed to the death penalty and did not like elected officials who pushed the death penalty. So, and I want to say that served me well when I was in the state Senate. Just jump ahead for a moment, because there were Republicans there who were also very Catholic, against abortion, although for family planning, and for doing good works. Tragically, they were for the death penalty, but I could really meet them on sort of the common ground of wanting to do good things for people, and we did.
So let's back it up a little bit again. No, this is wonderful. And go to.
By the way, when I was in my senatorial role, my council role, I could soundbite, but in this sort of a setting, I have trouble. I love this new session, landing the plane.
Let's not reduce these to sound bites. As we spoke about before, we'll regroup and so on. But
sound bites saying what I believed in. I didn't change what I supported or what I was opposed to. I just was able to get it down to a few words most of the time. Anyway, but you're not asking me to do that.
Who did?
I said, you're not asking me to do that.
No.
And I'm not feeling like I should do that, but you may be sorry.
Well, we'll see. But so let's back up a little bit to sexuality, sexual desire.
Yes.
If you can remember the first time you noticed being sexually attracted to men, or what is the evolution of your sexual desire, I should ask, because I don't know.
Very early on, I was more attracted to boys than girls, and but it was sort of in the back of my mind. But it was really when I was about 16 when I think was the first time I said to someone that I thought I might be gay. And but by 17, I was like, I know I'm gay. Although I'm not 1,000% gay, but I always identified gay. And I guess in my younger years, I explored my sexuality very broadly with girls and men, young women and young men. But as time went on, my relationships were with men. But I still retain a little bit of this, let's just say, whatever, is it Kinsey 5 or 6? I'm not, whatever it is the highest thing. I'm just a little bit below that.
6.
6, so I'm a Kinsey 4.5 then, I would say. But I always identified gay. And I didn't, so at 17, it was the summer between high school and college. I had I started smoking cigarettes, smoking pot, drinking, and having sex. And I had a friend, a very close friend, who went to Hunter College and knew gay people at Hunter. And so when I told her I was gay, and she was possibly the first person that I really said that I was gay, and identified gay at 17. So she introduced me to them, and I was determined to have sex. So my first sexual experience was with 2 gay men, a couple, and in Greenwich Village on Thompson Street in a rent-controlled apartment that they were subletting. There should be a plaque. I didn't fall in love with them or anything, but the dam had broken, and I didn't have a tremendous amount of sex at 17 because, and I'll get ahead of myself, when I went to college, I actually fell in love with someone in college, and we had a relationship. So, but you're not up to that yet. But that was my first falling in love, and I was fortunate because it worked out, at least for a while. I'm somewhat incapable of sustaining a relationship, but we did have a good relationship for a while, and I was very much in love with him, and he was in love with me. And he actually, though he would never say he was bisexual and didn't like to be labeled, had been in a long-term relationship with a woman before I met him, and I didn't know whether he was gay or not. I didn't know whether he was bi or not. I thought he was straight. But we became very good friends. I was a sophomore, he was a junior, because I lived in an upper-class, lower-class dorm. We were all mixed together, and boys on one side, young men on one side, and women on the other at Lehigh, where there were 3,000 men and 300 women. It was their second year of being co-ed. Anyway, he was a junior. He transferred in, and I was a freshman, and I remember exactly where we were walking on campus, and I turned to him and I said, probably not going to say his name, but I said, I think I've developed feelings for you. And again, I thought he was straight, like 100% straight. And he turned to me and he said, well, I have feelings for you too. And thus we embarked on, if I were to make a movie, I guess I would say an affair, but it was more than an affair. I mean, we really were in love. Didn't last for a very long time, or I'm trying to figure out how long it did last. It certainly lasted from that fall through the following summer, so probably about a year, if not a little bit longer. We were hiding, basically. My room would be out of, to class, and we'd quickly, spend time together, or in his dorm room when his roommate was out. Even one time his roommate walked in on me, and when I was campaigning for office one time, he walked by me on 42nd Street where he lived because he signed my petition. And after he left, I thought to myself, maybe he's gay. I mean, it was very possible that he was gay too, so maybe, I was already being a missionary for queer people. I jumped way ahead, but that was that was my, really I wanted, that was, my sexuality, I guess, blossomed with him. And, I'm very grateful to him. Interestingly, I've been, he lives in North Carolina, and I know where he lives in North Carolina, and I've been thinking about calling him. I saw him once in 1992 after I was elected to the city council. The LGBT elected officials had a conference in North Carolina, and we met up, and I met his wife and his child, and we had a nice time. It probably wouldn't have worked out because I'm a very urban person, and he thinks that he lives in Greensboro, North Carolina. He thinks that's too urban, so I'm not sure that we would have made it in the long run anyway. But I'm very grateful to him for my having had a nice sexual love affair, relationship with someone to get me going.
What was your sense of, what was the environment in college at that time, the sense of homosexuality, gay rights, anything? And also, if there, you can speak a little to what your sense of Stonewall was, this period of time, 69, 73, and what that evolution was like for you.
Because I lived in New York City, I knew about Stonewall. It was covered on the TV news. It was covered in the newspapers. So I knew about Stonewall. So I knew that homosexuals existed. And I'm not sure that I was such an avid reader of the Village Voice at that time, but I know that they covered Stonewall extensively. And I didn't come out then. As I say, I didn't come out. I didn't mention it to anyone until I was 16 or 17. But I knew that there was a gay liberation front. I knew there was I'm not sure how aware I was of when there became a GAA and a LFL, Lesbian Feminist Liberation, but I was aware of all of that was going on. Although where I lived in Queens, I might as well have been living, in Ohio, basically. It was a completely different world than Greenwich Village, and so I think I might have been like, millions and millions of queer kids who, know that there are other people like them and that there's a movement and both rebellion and acceptance and, fighting for rights prior to or as part of their, knowing it's okay to come out or that they can feel safe about coming out. But I certainly was out later on in Queens, but I wasn't living there anymore. Although interestingly, there was a gay bar in Queens, in Flushing, called the Square Lemon, and I could take you to the spot where it was, and everybody says, "Oh no, no such thing," but it does exist. And there are also gay bars in Jackson Heights. But anyway, I digress. So. See, I'm having trouble letting anything. What was your question? Oh, my sexuality. Bang.
Well, no, but this is great because, so what I'm sensing here is that Stonewall was something that you were aware of,
yes,
but weren't necessarily sure how it related to you?
It was, I would say it was combined into a sort of awakening, a political awakening I was having anyway, that I was no longer putting energy into trying to be a Vatican II Catholic, a folk mass Catholic kid, and became more of a secular, left-leaning person. I was always sort of organizing things. We had a teen club in my parish, and my brother John was president. I was program manager. so John, I was doing all the work, but that's okay. I was good at it. And I did everything from like arranging a ski trip for like 50 people, like the whole thing, to I organized a remedial reading and recreation program at a Catholic elementary school in Harlem. And I combined sort of people I knew in high school with people I knew from my parish for that. And I really, there are other things like that that I just sort of created or organized within. I was just always that kind of kid. And maybe part of it was I didn't want to go home, so I had to make up reasons to not go home. But I don't think that was entirely it. I think I was sort of called to do that. But the greatest consciousness, I have to say, was I was watching television with my father one night, and he had David Susskind on, and David Susskind was interviewing David Rothenberg, and he was a New York City health commissioner, and his name just went out of my head. And it may come back, but if not, I'll have to fill in the blanks. But David Rothenberg was the one I was riveted by, and his being out. So that made just a tremendous, impact on me. He had already moved from being a theatrical, publicist to having founded the Fortune Society. So I think part of why I was riveted by him also was because I think even then I felt that there was unfairness in the criminal justice system, and I admired that he was doing something about that, and he was gay. So, I don't even know whether my father and I talked about it, but I feel like there was some energy that passed between us, like, he knew and I knew that he knew that,
So I wanted to ask you some questions about your political consciousness in the late 60s, early 70s, anti-war movement, civil rights, Black Panthers, Young Lords. What was your sense of any of that stuff?
Well, Holy Cross High School had the largest YAF high school chapter in the country. YAF's Young Americans for Freedom, a very conservative organization, and Mr. Scalero, something like that, was his chemistry teacher. Scalero, maybe it was. Anyway, he was the faculty advisor. He was huge. I was not a member. Even then, that was not the way I thought about the world because of my Vatican II values, shall we say. But I think that, I was already leaning in the direction of, I say rock music. There was a radio station in New York, WNEW-FM, which I loved and played all the time. And Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, huge. But the real enormous turning point for me was Kent State. Because I couldn't believe that National Guard, soldiers could just shoot people. And then as a result of that, and, they were white, so I think, I'm sorry to say, that, or I'm not sorry, that's how it was, they shot white people. I mean, I'm not sure that I knew that black people were being shot all the time, but it just they were close to my age, and it just had a huge impact on me. And from there, everything changed. And I started to read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and Man-Child in the Promised Land had a huge impact on me. And I started to read feminist literature, and I don't know whether I read anything written by the Young Lords, but there's Pablo Guzman was a leader of the Young Lords, and he was to go on to become a television reporter in New York. And every time I got to be interviewed by him, I'd be like, I'm like, oh my God, gushing over him, and whoever I was, I said, do you know who this man is? So I just devoured all of that from then on, and I must have been a junior in high school, and I was a very big reader. We're celebrating the anniversary of Sergeant Pepper's. How many years is it? Is it 50 years?
50 years last June.
My goodness. So I listened to that over and over again. And I was really young for that. So already, so rock music was really having its I was going to say its intended impact. I don't know what was intended, but it certainly had an enormous impact on me.
How would you describe that impact?
I think that it opened my mind up to. I think this is really a reason why I'm sort of a passionate fighter for the arts, because I feel like crying again, because the arts, rock groups, the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's, and talk about the Grateful Dead, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Joni Mitchell, and the bands that Crosby, Stills, Nash were part of before that, whose names are tragically escaping me right now, but Buffalo Springfield, yes. So the arts really, while I didn't pursue the arts, it was as a result of the arts that I think I pursued trying to make a difference in the world, and to follow what one of my callings was, which was community activism, and I would say that more so than public service, which it morphed into later on, but community activism, because to be an organizer, to be an activist, you got to be creative. And I'm also an ADHD, which I know it's a good thing everyone is sitting down when I say that, because I know that's a huge shock. The best grade I ever got on an exam was when an ADHD specialist went through this question. She's like, oh my gosh, you're off the charts. But the skills, the focus that you get, because ADHD is uneven attention. So either we're totally 100% focused, which I kind of am now, or we're like, what am I having for dinner? What, something like that, which is problematic in school for, not getting the directions or the homework assignments correct. But anyway, I digress. So, but I think that focus was very helpful in what, I'm talking a lot about the music. I think the music was the most important thing. The music always brings me to a place in the past, or it sort of launches me into the future and helps me to live in the present. But I can see the album cover of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and I think it was beautiful and it was unusual, and I think. Unfortunately, my record collection was irreparably damaged in a flood, in a leaking roof. But anyway, but I would read the liner notes. I would read the lyrics, which were always on the inside of albums, and the lyrics are like poetry to me, and. Really, so music has really been a very important part of my life, and I'm not going to say I watch too much TV, but my favorite show is The Voice, because it's it's a music show when people sing, and it's a contest, but they're also mentoring and helping singers get better. And I love that idea. It's not even like who wins; it's how people get help. Anyway, so music, huge, tremendous impact in my life, and I can't imagine my life without it.
And the counterculture at the time, what was your sense of them? Did you find yourself to be part of it?
I was just a year or two too young to be a hippie, a year or two too young to have gone to Woodstock. But I loved hippies. I loved guys with long hair. My boyfriend I talked about had kind of long hair, and I considered him a hippie because we used a lot of drugs together. Which, if a young person is watching this, I'll talk to you about why it's not a good idea, but I can't not tell the truth that I did use a lot of drugs. And I mean, I was okay, and I don't know, it was kind of almost like a bonding thing that young people did. And I didn't use anything but marijuana until I got to college. But I do know some people in college who, when they used drugs heavier than marijuana, ended up in psychiatric institutions and have never been the same. So I'm not recommending drug use to people.
Did you find psychedelics to be helpful to your consciousness?
In a way, yes. Not so much the creative thoughts, which drifted away, but really in a very visual way, because some of the psychedelics were very much created, I don't want to call it false visual effects or whatever, but seeing the patterns and the colors and the vibrancy, that certainly has stuck with me. And so I really don't want to encourage people to be using psychedelics at all, because, but it did do that for me. I had, I guess, moments of being maybe paranoid, like everybody does, but that wasn't the overarching thing. They all did leave me exhausted also. I mean, the truth be told about my drug use, I mean, in college, again, I knew someone who lived in my dorm who was friends with truckers, and he had access to crystal meth, and so in college I did a lot of crystal meth. And I never shot it up, but I snorted it and ingested it. And I would say one of the reasons that I liked it is, speedy things, ADHD people, we love speedy things, coffee and, amphetamines. And I burned out of amphetamines, actually. By the time I left college, I got very sort of physically, it took a big toll on me. I mean, I recovered from it, but it had a very negative impact on me physically. So, but that was a big, drugs were part of, again, I wasn't a hippie, but the counterculture, the Woodstock generation, of which I was just a couple of years behind it, really. I was very much like how I wanted to go to first grade because my brother was going into second grade. I wanted to be part of that. I wanted to be part of the counterculture. And, it's hard for a bourgeois kid from Queens to be part of the counterculture, but I did my best, I did my best.
Did you feel that the movements of that time, whether they're protest movements or the counterculture movement, affected your consciousness as a gay person?
Yes, and I also want to say that just, of course, we saw images of the Vietnam War too, which just, you know, terrible and so sad, and you know, what was the point? And I don't want to denigrate people who, you know, go into the military, but I just, you know, the United States really has not changed very much, and I'm sad about that. But I'm going to have to ask you to ask me the question again, because I just lost myself.
It's okay. Whether the movements of that time and the counterculture movement as well affected your gay consciousness as
enormously, and I was very aware that all of those movements had a tremendous impact on the early gay rights movement, which was in many ways very radical. And so when I was at Lehigh, where I started a gay organization, which maybe we'll get into, which was not a welcome new club on campus. I have been recently studying it. Now Lehigh is like, you know, it's so pro-queer, it's unbelievable, you know. It's he, she, they, you know, it's just amazing, you know, like ahead of me. But there was nothing, so I started this Lehigh Homophile Association. But anyway, in the Lehigh Valley, there were a couple, they were librarians, and they had a little tiny group, I don't know if there's even more than them, the two of them, maybe it was, called Lehigh Ho, kind of an unfortunate but catchy name. And, you know, it's wonderful and funny at the same, you know, it's, you know, how could you not call it that? But, you know, maybe you should call it that. But they were librarians, so they had a library of you know, lesbian and gay literature. And I read every book they had. And so much of the theoretical thinking of a lot of the early lesbian and gay rights activists were a continuation of, I would say, especially feminism, but also black liberation and other liberation movements, you know, reflected in their names. And, you know, there weren't many gay books, but if there was one, I'm pretty sure I read it. And I did that for a very long time. I feel like I don't read as much gay literature now as I used to. And I don't know what that is. And I was passing a bookstore actually this weekend, walking towards Christopher Street just to make sure I'm still gay. And I saw a new book that Brad Gooch wrote about something, a very important topic, which I cannot remember now, but I thought to myself, oh, you know, I have to go back there and buy that book, you know, supporting my local gay bookstore. But it's, again, the topic is out of my head. I have it written down someplace so I won't forget, but I will never be able to find it anytime soon where I have that piece of paper. I'm just thinking of something that goes along with that. You know, I'm saying, oh, you know, I feel like, you know, the LGBT community in New York doesn't really need me anymore. Like, I think what would be better if I became a foot soldier in, you know, Alabama or Mississippi, where the really brave queers are now. Not that everything is perfect and wonderful in New York, it certainly isn't, but it's really rough in the South, and that combined with you know, HIV and AIDS work. It's not like stigma doesn't exist in New York, trust me, it exists, and discrimination exists in a big way, but there are people working on that, but I feel like there are less people working on it in the South. But anyway, there's a couple of years ago I went down to the city council. I'm on the board of a children's agency that helps new alternatives for children. They help medically fragile children in and out of the foster care system, and it's just a wonderful organization. It gets kids really who've been written off, like, go on to become, go to graduate school. But anyway, so I was down there, and the Gay Caucus was having a meeting. And so I went, to say hello to all of them. And they were like, let's have a picture. And I was like, oh, what a great idea. So they were all lined up against the wall. And I'm sitting here and they're like, no, we want you in the picture. So there's a picture of me and, 6 openly gay city council members. And I thought, oh my God, this is what I always wanted to happen. Like, this has happened, this is like a dream come true that, and they were multicultural. It could have been, there's only one woman, there could have been more women, it was just beautiful. And I love that picture. But I'm sorry, I jumped way ahead, but there was, there were no openly gay elected officials back then in the early days at all. I think the first openly gay person, one of the first, was elected to the Ann Arbor City Council, and then there was Elaine Noble, who was a state senator out of Cambridge in Massachusetts, but it was a very small group of people. Anyway, all of those books, which sort of worldview, these gay books, lesbian, feminist books, their worldview was very much informed by other liberation movements, and that really was very, very powerful for me. And while I was a Democrat then, and I'm a Democrat now, I also have been sympathetic to groups, to the left of the Democratic Party, and that has continued. And actually, I'm sad because the right wing seems to have so much media helping it, and the left has, it's like a David and Goliath. So I subscribe to, Marxist, Leninist, Trotsky, newspapers, just to keep them alive. Like, I don't even agree with 90% of what's in them, but I don't want them to go away. I feel like it's my job to support them because there's no left, MSNBC is about as, left as it's going to get, and that's still, pretty mainstream. I don't know the last time they put a Marxist on, or, not that I would want to have Marxists all the time, but, these right-wing people are they're so far to the right that it's just so way out of the mainstream. And, a lot of the left-wing people I know who are not within the Democratic Party, they're not so far out of the mainstream. I remember the Communist Party USA used to have their headquarters in Chelsea, and I think it said something like democracy, equality, and something else. And in one of the local newspapers, like the Villager, or, Chelsea Now, had a story about how what they had on their banner really was was my platform, that I would be very comfortable with them.
Angela Davis and Gus Hall.
Oh my God, Angela Davis and Gus Hall ran in 1980 after a bruising primary between Jimmy Carter and Ted Kennedy. And Angela Davis is a hero to me. She came to New York and spoke. I rushed, to go and, took pictures with her, and I hung on every word. And oh, she's so brilliant. And she was able to say things in a way that people could understand, like average people could understand what she's saying. But she doesn't have a platform, you know? You know what? Rachel Maddow ought to put Angela Davis on more. I don't know whether she's even ever had her on. She's just amazing, Angela Davis. So smart and so, you know, wanting people to be, you know, free and equal and, you know, so here I haven't changed that much since I was 16, 17, or I'd say even younger than that. I still, I haven't changed that much. So good for me.
Still informed by a lot of the politics of a certain time, just updated.
Very much so.
How did, for you personally, how did the gay consciousness continue to evolve through the 70s? What did you think of Harvey Milk? What was your personal life like? Let's roll on to the 70s more. Your own development of gay consciousness, some of your personal life that was going on, lovers and stuff, and
well, I started a gay organization at Lehigh. We were a very small group. I think that we probably all had sex with, maybe not everyone had sex with everyone, but certainly everyone had sex with someone else in the organization. And then we had to call in reinforcements from Lafayette, which had a teeny tiny, I don't even think they were an official group, there's just like 3 or 4 people at Lafayette, which was the Lehigh's arch rival in every way. And then we had one meeting, we had lesbians from Scranton came to talk with us, and we were like, well, what do you do? And they're like, well, we read Ms. and we discuss it. I mean, there was really, it was a very different time. And
what years are we talking about now?
I think 74 is when I started the gay organization at Chelsea. Because 72, 73 was a freshman, 73, 74, I was a residence hall counselor. And I was open on my floor, actually, open to the freshmen. And by open, I would say I didn't, I wasn't a gay activist just because I wasn't a gay activist, but I was not, I was open about being gay.
How did they take that?
You know, I didn't have great self-esteem for a whole host of reasons growing up. I think that I would say they loved me. I just think they really, you know, they all loved me, but I certainly loved them too. This was totally against the rules of being a residence hall counselor, but like, a couple of them said that they wanted to smoke pot, but they didn't want to smoke pot so they wanted to smoke pot with me because they felt safe smoking pot with me, you know, because pot, you know, was portrayed as this, you know, monster that was going to destroy everyone's lives. And, but even more, many more of them asked me, when the freshman at Lehigh had to take 2 semesters of English, and they had to write themes all the time. And they would often ask me to help them with their themes. And, you know, there are many, many engineers at Lehigh, business majors at Lehigh at that time, and not that many. I think the smallest school was the liberal arts school, possibly. But anyway, I helped a lot of the freshmen who were, you know, mandated to take English classes. I helped them write their themes, or, you know, help them edit their themes. And I think maybe that's more important than, you know, being their first smoking pot experience. That was the extent of my bad boundaries with them, though. The Griffin upstairs from me. Usually there were 2 to a floor, but in the dorm we were in, the wing of the dorm we were in, the floors were had less rooms on them. So I was the only residence hall, we were called Griffins, residence hall Griffin on my floor. And my friend Bruce was the Griffin upstairs, and he had asked to be Griffin with me. And, you know, in my being I could say recruit, P.S., by the way, we do recruit, maybe it's missionary. He eventually came out as being gay also. And, I was young then, and I think sometimes people wanted to be friends with me, or maybe I felt some sort of kinship with them. In retrospect, I think a lot of them were gay or at least bisexual. And I feel like, I said that I loved hippies. I feel like the hippie culture, there was more sort of an innocent bisexuality that happened, that a lot of men who, weren't gay but were maybe whatever the straight 4.5 is, would be willing to, try out having sex with another man, that it was not, that the person that they had sex with was going to end up dead, that there was a much simpler. I actually feel that way about men that I've known who are not gay, but, and I most of the time, I think most of the time, didn't have sex with them, but could have had sex with them because they wanted to explore their sexuality. And I think I was a very safe person. I was certainly a very safe person for people who actually did want to come out. And it's hard to find, like, how do you be gay? Like, how do you prove that you're gay? You have to have sex with someone. So maybe I was a little too available for people to have sex with for their first time, but people have been nice, and, that couple had been gracious enough to have sex with me to start off with. I shouldn't laugh about it, because sometimes people get very strong feelings for the first person that they have sex with. And so I probably, I know I owe amends to some people who probably who I know were attracted to me, but who, I wasn't that attracted to, but that they wanted to, like, be gay, and, they liked me, and I, as I say, was pretty much incapable of having relationships. Not that I didn't have them, I did, but I'm not, I would say that relationships are very challenging for me. So I think also at Lehigh, if I hadn't come out, I probably would have had sex with more people, because then, more likely that a person also who was gay but not at all ready to come out would avoid me at all costs. And that even happened when I was in government in New York City in the 90s, that people didn't want to be seen, gay people didn't want to be seen with me because they thought people would think they were gay. Straight people, they didn't care. But anyway, but I think when I came out, there were a lot of people who then started to avoid me. Anyway, my third year at Lehigh, I guess that's when I started the group, the Homophile, where I got that name from. I think that might have been an early gay liberation kind of academic. Oh, there was something called the Gay Academics Union, too, and I went to their conferences. Anyway, so
Columbia had a gay homophile league.
Oh, and Morty Manford.
Yes.
I dated Morty Manford, actually. Yes. I know. And he grew up like 3 blocks from where I grew up in Flushing. And when I ran away from home one time, I went to their house.
Oh, that's a whole other story.
Yes. Morty Manford, oh my gosh. Maybe leading up to Morty Manford. So I would often on the weekends leave Lehigh, take the bus, come to New York City, go to a GA meeting, which I want to say were usually on a Friday night. I don't know why I think that. And I think Morty, when I first started, because I remember going to a dance at the Firehouse, so that must have been before it's been like 73, 74 maybe. I can't remember when it burned down, but I certainly went to meetings there, and they were having some problems, Gay Activist Alliance, and I don't know, there's various very left, groups were, I don't know, they were having some internal strife. I don't want to cast aspersions on any organizations. I think people meant well, but they often wanted to take over organizations, which is everyone's right to do, but is not always the best thing for women. Anyway, so I would go, and I went as much. So I both went to get filled with rhetoric and how dare you presume I'm a heterosexual, whatever, that's just a simple thing, but really just to be in a room with certainly more than 100 gay people was amazing. And by Saturday, I would have sex with somebody. So I both was going to the meetings to get filled with queer, activist spirit and energy and the language to go along with it, and to find gay people to, have sex with. I feel like that's a shameful thing, but anyway, it's not shameful. It just was the way it was. I mean, the sexual freedom sort of way of life, or not way of life, but belief in sexual freedom, which, started, I guess, with the Bohemians and Allen Ginsberg, who even wanted to have sex with a truck. I never had sex with a truck, although there was a lot of sex in trucks. Not one of my things. I'm not judging it. I had other things, but that just happened to not be one of my things. There was a bathhouse that had a truck in it. I'm trying to remember the name of that bathhouse. I just went there for research. It was on 15th Street. Anyway.
It wasn't where Bette was it?
No. I actually never saw her at the Club Baths. It was a Club Baths, right? It was in Continental. It was in the Ansonia, in the basement of the Ansonia. No, it was. No, it might have been going on when I was around being gay, but I never went to see her there. I did go to a place called the Ballroom a lot, which was owned by gay people and had a lot of cabaret acts and a lot of pro-gay and possibly, closeted, not closeted gay people perform there. But I digress. But so the free love that came, into sort of the hippie movement, the counterculture, certainly was part of gay life and gay freedom, and it was, an in-your-face to heterosexuals, to have sex with a lot of people. That's what we do, and I certainly was doing my fair share of upholding that philosophy. Unless I was in a relationship, at least in the early days, then I would be monogamous with someone.
What did you think about that? About that was revolutionary? Having sex with whoever you wanted and in your face. What did that mean to you and to the movement?
I think at a certain point, I don't know whether I'm answering your question, I never gave it a second thought. I was part of that in-your-face gay liberation, manifestation or tenet of being like a radical gay person was you had sex with, and even people in relationships would have, it was a lot more open relationship, I believe, activity going on then. As I'm pretty sure I had sex with people who were part of a relationship. which I may or may not have known when I had sex with him. Anyway, it was just, I can't, it was just, it was like, I want to say it was in my gay DNA. I remember thinking, the very beginning, Roman Catholic, this is sinful, but, sinful was something I, threw by the wayside at a certain point. But I remember saying, I would never sleep with a lot of different people to someone, early on, but I don't think I was telling the truth. I was good to go. I think I wasn't having sex with a lot of people at the time. There was an opportunity, but when there was opportunity, I really could not say that to anyone anymore.
And this is more like the late 70s now, is my sense?
I'd say mid-70s. Yes, because I left Lehigh in 1975, and I lived for a while with a friend who lived on in a walk-up on the east side, and I had another friend who got an apartment in the building, but then I moved to Chelsea, and in 1976 I moved to Chelsea, and I certainly was having a lot of sex in the latter part of 1975 and 1976. And
did you go to the gay march in 1979?
In 1979?
Yep, the first one.
Yes, but I think...
In D.C.
Oh, yes, I did go to that one. Absolutely. Absolutely I went.
What was that like for you?
I was very stoned. It was high the whole weekend. But it was great. It was great. I'd never seen so many gay people all at one time. And I also, a friend of mine who was bisexual, and she's actually the first person that I told that I was gay, she, on that Friday night, there was a dance for the black LGBT community, and we went to that dance, and it was great. And then the march on Saturday, it was wonderful. It was absolutely... I can't tell you where we stayed. I don't know how we got there. I think actually, I think someone, maybe I was dating someone. I don't know how we got there, but I think we got there by car. But absolutely, I was there. It was amazing. It was, it was wonderful. It was great. It was really. It was, like a life-changing event.
How?
Because it wasn't a New York thing anymore. It was a national. It wasn't just a New York, San Francisco thing. It was truly a national march. There were people, I don't know whether from every state. I don't know whether they said that at the time. And I'm sure I thought there were many more people there than there actually were. But it just seemed like we were on our way to, to full equality, knowing that it would be a struggle, but that there were lots of, should we say, comrades in arms who would be there to fight with us along the way, that we were all fighting together.
It almost sounds to me, I don't want to put words in your mouth because we're not supposed to do that, but it almost sounds like that might have been more of the seminal event that informed you as you went forward into...
No, I'm afraid not, because I marched in 1979 as part of an organization that I was not a founder of, but a founding member of, the Chelsea Gay Association, which was founded, I believe, in 1977 by Pat Cleese and Arthur Goodman, and Michael McKee, who's been a great tenant organizer, was in the Chelsea Gay Association and is then lover, is what we called people then. And I just was at an event in Washington, D.C., and Ron Johnson was there. And Ron Johnson was a member of the Chelsea Gay Association. Ron Johnson, who's someone who has been openly gay in city, state, and federal government, and with, local and national LGBT organizations and AIDS organizations like his whole life. When he was making remarks, he said that, and even, in 1977, I was a member of the Chelsea Gay Association. I don't know whether he said 1977, but I was a member of the Chelsea Gay Association, and Tom Duane was there, So that's really how I learned to do LGBT and neighborhood organizing, shall we say, which isn't, I guess, so different from college or high school or, I don't know, Christian organizing, whatever. But the Chelsea Gay Association was a huge part of my life. It was a non-political organization. We didn't have a lot of members. We would have events like everything from, a night of, it was not political. It was like a neighborhood association. I guess now it would be like an online community or something, but, so you did a night of playing board games to rap sessions with the police officers from the 10th Precinct, which was the precinct in Chelsea.
Define rap for a second for the...
Well, Saturday morning, 2 or 3 of us would go to the precinct, and like maybe 5 police officers would be there, and we would talk about what it was like to be gay and to try to sensitize them to what it was like to be gay. And they would ask us questions about what it was like to be gay. And I knew this then, and probably would hold true now. Any police officer that said, "How did you tell your parents?" I would say 99% accuracy, that person is gay. Because that is the toughest thing. That's the toughest thing, I think, for people, is to tell their parents, right? It's very difficult. So anyway, so rap sessions with police officers, and we had street fairs. We participated in street fairs. We went to the March on Washington as a group. We marched in the New York City Gay Pride. I believe I know we were still marching uptown to the park in those days. So we marched with our banner together. And that was 77, 78, 79. And actually out of that organization, it was in the, I don't know the exact date, late 1979 maybe. There were bars along the waterfront in Chelsea in the West 20s. And there was a New York City Housing Authority project in the teens between 8th and 9th Avenues. And these bars were on 11th Avenue by the West Side Highway. And there was a problem with gay men getting beaten up if they made their way sort of anywhere near the housing project. And certainly that wasn't the only place where there was, gay bashing, but by far. But it was, I guess, maybe gay men were more willing to report it to the police or something, because if they lived in, Chelsea or the Village or wherever, and they were, their destination was one of those bars, they were more willing to talk about the violence. So I organized a forum on violence in Chelsea, and I invited the head of the Housing Authority, their Tenants Association, and the development at that time was made up of Irish people and Latino people, and also some African-American people, and then, of course, some intermingling as well. But the head of the organization, her name was Helen Gilson. She was the wife of a longshoreman. She was a force to be reckoned with, and she was head of this tenants association. And I invited her to come, and people talked about, violence and what had happened to them. And then towards the end of it, she stood up and she said, "Well," she said, "you're not my cup of tea, but I don't think you should be beaten up." That was everything. And she told, the word came out from her to the Fulton House's to the the young men living there to leave the gay people alone. And there was a precipitous drop in violence. And I just, I thought, you're not my cup of tea, but I don't think you should be beaten up. It was like such a huge victory for us. And also, I think it was certainly life-changing for Helen Gilson. Later on, I was to serve on the community board, the local planning board with Helen Gilson. And I would say I have tremendous respect and, just affection for her. The first time, I was the first openly gay person on the board. The first openly gay person on the board was Jean O'Leary, who's a great activist, he's a famous activist if you're queer. And she was the first member, openly gay member, I'm sure a lesbian member of the community board. And that was revolutionary for also for Helen Gilson and Rosemary Lynch, whose husband Willie Lynch was a leader of the Longshoremen's Union, was on that community board too, because Chelsea used to be many people who worked on the docks and many merchant marines or people who worked on ships. So that's why a lot of the apartments in Chelsea were single room occupancy. There were a lot of studio apartments in Chelsea because there were so many people who worked on the ships and for the ships who lived in, when they were on land, they lived in these, rooms. Anyway.
If you could speak about your work in government, since that period of time as you became more, you were doing community organizing in the mid-late 70s, and then this steamrolls over the years.
I may have become a little bit more establishment in let's say the positions I held, the establishment positions I held. My beliefs I don't think varied so very much. I may have gotten better at listening to people who had different opinions. Anyway, I became a Democratic district leader, which meant I was the head of the Democratic Party in my half of the Assembly district, which was Chelsea and a little bit of the environs around it. And I was also a member of Community Board 4, which was for Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen, Clinton, or Clinton, Hell's Kitchen, depends on what year it was, what was the appropriate word for it. But then David Rothenberg, one of my heroes, ran for the city council in 1985, ran a great race, but unfortunately he lost by a couple of percentage points. And I asked him, maybe in 87 or so, if he was planning on running again. He said no. So I said, well, I think I'd like to run. And he gave me his blessing. And so I ran for the city council in 1989. I think I got about the same vote as David Rothenberg did. Maybe there was a percentage point difference between us, but it was the same thing. These districts were enormous too, much bigger than the city council districts are now. They were practically, I feel like they were almost the size of a congressional district. But anyway, and we were running against a long-term incumbent. Anyway, and that was like a great experience in so many ways. And then I went to work for another one of my heroes for a year, Liz Holtzman, who was a Congress member, wonderful, and took on everyone in the Watergate congressional hearings, and also was probably the best Nazi hunter in office we'll ever have. She went on to run for the U.S. Senate and lost. She should have won. It's a whole other story why she didn't win, but she should have won. She was robbed. And then she went on to be Brooklyn DA and New York City Comptroller. And I worked for her when she was City Comptroller, which I loved her and I admire her to this day. And we're still friends. In fact, my Democratic Club is giving the Thomas Duane Award to her because they said, "Who do you want?" I said, "I want to honor Liz Holtzman." Then in 1989, the people of New York City voted for a new charter, and the new charter called for the council increasing in size from 35 to 51. And there was some thinking behind it that they would create a district that was Dominican winnable and Asian winnable and gay winnable, and anyway, so I lived in the gay winnable district, Chelsea, Hell's Kitchen, the Village. Certainly there was a sizable gay community, but I don't think it ever went above like 30%, which is enormous if you think about, compared to, I don't know, what the national average is. But it certainly wasn't the majority of people, nor was it monolithic. But anyway, the district was Chelsea, Hell's Kitchen, the West Village, some of the Central Village, a little bit of Murray Hill, a little bit of Soho. And I disclosed my HIV status as part of that, at the very beginning of that campaign, and went on to win the primary and then went on to win the general election. And I served at the city council for 7 years, during which time I only had a couple years of Mayor David Dinkins, and then I had Mayor Giuliani, who I want to say I bested a number of times. First, he was going after the Division of AIDS Services and under the guise of reforming it because people had complained about it. He was actually trying to eliminate it, which first I, along with activist groups and my colleagues on the council, stopped that. Because I would say, there's no substitute for a seat at the table. And as a result of that, I was able to, in ways that'll be in the book I'm never writing, pass a law that enshrined the Division of AIDS Services, which is now called HASA, no longer DAS, it's Housing and Services Administration, I guess. There has to be an AIDS in there. I'm sorry, I'm not saying it right. But anyway, that's what it is now. But it's enshrined in law, so there's, it has strict client to, social services worker, which, is great, and every social services agency with a caseworker to clients, and that services be provided in a timely manner, that people be housed in habitable housing, and just a whole host of the advisory committee. It's a wonderful bill, if I must say so myself, and it passed unanimously in the city council. So Mayor Giuliani, trying to destroy the Division of AIDS Services, made it possible for it to be put into place to protect people in New York City living with AIDS. And the other thing was domestic partnership benefits. And my bill, Mayor Dinkins had put into effect like a registry, and so you could visit someone in the hospital, and it was a good first step, because it was never enough for me. Nothing is ever enough for me. Anyway, my domestic partnership bill, can you imagine domestic partnership? Was like a huge victory. We're talking a huge victory. And my bill just said anywhere where it says spouse in law or in the administrative code of the city of New York, you put in domestic partner as well. And he had his people in the mayor's lawyers, the councils, his whole department, the city department. They went through all of New York City's laws and the entire administrative code, and they added domestic partner to place. And mine, the problem is going forward, like you have to remember to put domestic partner in his house. Mine just would have made it automatically, in there. But anyway, of course he didn't want it, but it ended up passing. I think in the council, if not unanimously, close to unanimously. And of course, both bills, he had to actually sign into law while I was sitting there. I'm sure I got a pen each time. But I do have a very funny story with Mayor Giuliani that I just cannot, even though we fought a lot about a lot of things, he did have a sense of humor. Should I tell this story? It's not a gay story particularly.
Go ahead.
All right, so
we can carry on.
Okay, so the Foundling Hospital is in my district, and I had a couple of cousins, because my father was one of 8 children, and I had a couple of cousins who had been adopted from the Foundling Hospital by siblings of my father. And they wanted to name the street corner after the founder of the order. And they had to get the approval of the local community board, which was Board 5, a board that I was not on, it was sort of Midtown Manhattan, more of a businessy kind of board. Anyway, they lost twice before the community board. So Sister Rita came to me and she asked me if I would help them. And what could I say? I mean, I had my cousins that had been, adopted from the house. So I went to the Board 5 meeting and I spoke in favor of it. And I said, and I made a deal to shave a little bit of time off my time in purgatory by supporting this name change. And so around the community board, which is 50 members, like every Catholic and even some others, they all said, in the spirit of shaving some time off purgatory, I'm voting yes. So it passed, and then Mayor Giuliani had to sign it into law. And I was sitting next to him, and, we were pleasantries. It's not personal. If they say something about your mother, you can disagree on policy. So I always tell the kids. So I said to Mr. Mayor, I made a deal to shave some time off purgatory. I think you should, before you sign this, try to make that deal. And he turned to me and he said, I hope I make it. It was the funniest thing. It was great. And he did have that kind of sense of humor, could be warm like that, sometimes. Anyway, it was just a great, story, a very human story about him. But the lessons I learned in the city council, I took with me when I ran for the state senate, which I did in 1998, because the state senator for the district that I lived in was running for attorney general and had to give up her Senate seat. And, people will say, oh, he just ran for that seat because he was going to be term limited. But I had like 4 or 5 years left before I was going to be term limited out of office. So, but what I had realized in the city council was the state controls so much of what happens in the city. So I was like, I'll run for it. And my council district was completely within it. So it was a rather easy race. I didn't have a primary, and I won the general election to overwhelmingly Democratic district. But in the same way that, I'm a nice guy. I hope I'm coming off as a nice guy, a sense of humor, and I am certainly empathetic. And Peter Vallone, who's the Speaker of the City Council, and I was there very early on, called me into his office, and he said to me, you've changed a lot of minds around here, because I'm just like a regular guy. I'm special, but I'm a regular guy. But I'm passionate about some things, many things. I'm fierce, let's say. I'm not mean to people or anything, but I'm like, we're passing this law. So in the state senate, once again, I was the only one. And my predecessor had said that they all said, oh, what's he like? What's Duane like? Because they knew I was a member of ACT UP. And she's like, you'll see when he gets there. And when I went up before the session had even started to get my office in Albany organized, there's a senator who was there who didn't want to shake my hand. And one of the battles that I had to continuously fight in the Senate was HIV stigma. Just incredible, the stigma in New York State and the criminalization that was being put into place for people with HIV. I'll just briefly say, while I was there, my first 2 years, we passed hate crimes legislation, which had lingered for 10, 12 years. The next term, because they're 2-year terms, Sonda passed, and though I was very angry that gender equality based on gender expression was not in the bill, and I know that I could have gotten it into the bill. I'm not going to I was very angry at those forces that prevented that from happening, because I remember saying to the head of the Republicans, Joe Bruno, with whom I had a very good relationship, and I said, Senator Bruno, like, no one's vote is going to change on this. Like, the people voting, think it's, men wearing skirts teaching school. Like, so if you put gender in it, like, it's not going to change any votes. No one's going to not vote for it because they already think they're voting for, the ones who are the best. I hate to make fun of it, but, men wearing skirts, as teachers or whatever. And he said, I think you have a point there, but the Assembly had passed a bill without it, and no one wanted to risk that it not pass. So anyway, but that had been a second term. Then marriage. There could be a whole thing on marriage. So let's just say that in 2009, while I know it could have passed, it didn't pass. People who had made promises that they would vote for it broke them. I knew before it was being voted on in 2009 that it was going to fail. It was heartbreaking. It wasn't supposed to be voted until 2010, and there were reasons for that, but Governor Patterson, in a ill-conceived and rather selfish way, put it on the agenda to be voted on, and it failed. But it did pass to 2013. When did 2011? I'm sorry, because I was there. Governor Cuomo was there first year. I'm sorry. I wasn't even there in 2013. 2011. I also passed Dignity for All Students Act, DASA, a Safe Schools bill, which is transgender inclusive. Like, the words are actually in the gender identity expression are actually in the bill, and it passed with maybe 3 or 4 people voting against it, thus proving what I had always said, that it doesn't matter, but if you put gender in by itself, it's going to fail, which it did when it came up for a vote, the one time it came up for a vote. Again, with a couple of Republicans breaking the word, not just to me, but to a colleague of mine, Diane Savino. One of them, I think, is in jail. I'm not sure what happened to the other one or who that was. Actually, I do know who it was.
How are we doing?
We have 11 minutes.
Okay.
Oh, my goodness. But, I mean, there was so much around the marriage debate. Even my introduction of the bill, there were those in the LGBT community who said, "Oh, don't do it. There's going to be a DOMA, a Defense of Marriage Act passed in New York State." And I thought, it's never going to happen. And there's this thing that happens in the legislature where people are elected to the Board of Regents, which is the educational board for the state, if you will. It's an independent agency, but is elected by the legislature. And it's when the Democrats are in the minority, it's the one time that we could win every time, because we voted with all the Democrats in the Assembly. So we're all in the Assembly chamber, and I went up to the Speaker of the Assembly, who nothing would ever pass without his okay. And I just went up to him, he was sitting on the dais, and I said, Speaker Silver, would you ever let a DOMA pass the Assembly? And he said, of course not. I mean, that's all. It's very simple. You just go and ask. But I think it was like a fear tactic. I don't, people raising money like to stop DOMA from happening or whatever. But I think I introduced it in 2002, I want to say. It took a while to get passed. But I introduced Dignity very early on, Dignity for All Students Act, but it didn't pass till I was in the majority. I also modernized HIV testing. I passed legislation doing that. When I first arrived in the legislature, in the Senate, while they were still a little bit afraid of me, they had already passed bills before I got there, which had sailed through the Senate and sailed through the Assembly, that was for police officers and firefighters and correctional officers that let me pass while I was there, even though I was opposed to it, that said that if there was any, like, I don't even know whether it had to be blood or anything, but any kind of scuffle, or I don't know how the wording of the bills were, that first they could force the testing of the incarcerated person, or anyway, I may not be Anyway, the point is that if they contracted AIDS, it would be presumed that they got it on the job. And how were they getting it on the job? And a bill came up that said if you were transporting someone from a nursing home to a hospital, you had the right to find out the HIV status of the person that you had transported after you had transported them. It's stupid. It's like, what good is that? But anyway, like, if you're going to do it, you want to know before. I'm just saying I'm against it. But so I was like, so anyway, I was like saying, you don't get it by tonight. And I moved away from my seat to go towards one of my Senate colleagues, Senator Oppenheimer. So when you speak on the Senate floor, you're not supposed to leave your, you stand behind your seat and you're not supposed to move. So I moved over towards her, and all the sergeant arms started to close in on me because they thought I was going to hit the senator whose bill it was, which I wasn't going to do. But I was like, wow. And our leader at the time, Senator Connor, turned to them and said, yeah, Duane took out a couple of people when he was in the council. But the way I stopped these HIV, stupid presumption bills, I stood up and I would read, I'd say, okay, according to the New York State, Institute, the AIDS Institute, there are only 4 ways you can contract HIV: blood transfusions, breastfeeding, sharing, drug injection, needles, or, any needles, and unprotected oral, vaginal, or anal sex. And I just kept saying that. And after a while, they were just like, they didn't want me to say that anymore, so they stopped bringing the bills up. That didn't stop bad bills, but I was able to stop most of the bills after that. And literally, like it was said, because Mayor Bloomberg tried to go around me to change an HIV testing law, and couldn't get past me. And I finally passed a HIV testing modernization bill, which had enough for everybody to really like it and enough for everybody not to like. But, things have changed since then, rapid testing and PrEP. It's different. But anyway, it protected confidentiality and did a number of other things. It made, the most important thing maybe was it made the mandatory offering of an HIV test in a healthcare setting. Mm-hmm. So it made it routine. So it wasn't, well, this doctor thinks this person might be, or that person might be, which was,
Started happening in the ERs almost immediately.
Right. And this made it so that they asked everybody. And I gave on something instead of checking yes and checking no. If they said no, you only need to check that. It was durable in that healthcare setting, permanent, it lasted that healthcare setting. Anyway, but because I had fought against these HIV presumption bills, one of which was for taxi inspectors and CUNY, City University of New York guards, and some other people who were represented by a union, I fought against it. I mean, it's absurd that I don't want people with AIDS to not get services. I passed a whole piece of legislation to do that in New York City. I just did not approve of that you would presume they would get it on the job, because what were they doing? Were they breastfeeding or, having unprotected sex? And I did make fun of it with a cab, so I was sarcastic, which I learned not to be so much later on, but I couldn't help it. I'm sorry, I just couldn't. I was new and it was ridiculous. Anyway, I almost got a primary as a result of that. The union that represented them was running against me because I had fought against that bill. And I was like, I can't believe you're running against me. By the way, no police officer or firefighter up to that point, or I think to this point, has ever retired because they had AIDS, or correction officer, because none of them would ever say they had AIDS. So no one ever even used it. But I had to make you don't get it through the air. You don't get it by shaking hands. It's really hard to get HIV. It was back to the days of when I disclosed in 1991 when Magic Johnson was thrown out of basketball at the same time. I mean, there was but that's where the state was in 1999. And along the way, I'm not sure that some of them even understood to this point. They just didn't want me to say unprotected oral, vaginal, or anal sex, which I probably couldn't even, I'd have to put a footnote on it.
Let's,
In fact, when I left, part of my leaving speech, when I said goodbye, I said, I just have to say one last time, unprotected oral, vaginal, or anal sex. And let's just say one. I did get to go viral once in, I want to say it was in 2010. I gave a speech on the Senate floor about HIV and people with AIDS. It was a speech that I'd been waiting like 10 years to give there. And I finally got to give it. I only gave a third of it. I had more to go, but I'd made my point. And to my colleagues, it was a bill having to do with people who were being impoverished because of where they were living. It was called the 30% red cap, which people had to pay almost all of any money they got, disability or Social Security, and they were left with like $11 or $12 a day to live on in New York City, which is just impossible. Anyway, the bill passed twice. Governor Patterson vetoed it the first time. Anyway, more to come.
We have to wind it up now.
Yeah, just still, there is no substitute for a seat at the table. I really believe that there would have been a lot more criminalization. Something else I did. The correctional system in New York State, the health facilities are overseen by the correctional department itself. Every other healthcare facility in the state is overseen by the Department of Health. They're operated under rules and regulations and under the jurisdiction of the Department of Health, except for the Department of Corrections. So I did pass a bill that made it so that HIV, tuberculosis, hepatitis, other infectious diseases, the health department would oversee that in New York State's correctional facilities, which at the time was like 70 prisons. There are less now. And also every jail in every county, so that people would get the most up-to-date treatments when they were incarcerated. And it was the first time the health department had ever had any jurisdiction in the correctional system. So I'm very proud of that bill. And correctional issues and passion were a passion of mine. And so this was a marrying of, HIV, AIDS, infectious diseases, and my passion for what happens to people when they're incarcerated, whether, for longer terms in a state correctional facility or in a county facility. And so that and stopping the criminalization of people who have HIV or AIDS, I wanted to put a stop to that as much as I could. And maybe, if you got it, use it. I'm gay. I have HIV, use it. Although I think even if I didn't have HIV, I truly believe I would fight as hard as as I did. But it probably helped to say that I had HIV. But
I think it has some gravitas. I just do.
We get
Okay.
Okay.